What if every time you booked a flight, you were also handing immigration enforcement a detailed map of exactly where you are, where you're going, and when you'll be most vulnerable? What if the moment you passed through airport security, your information was being shared with agencies that have the power to detain you, question you, or even begin deportation proceedings against you? And what if your phone, the device you carry everywhere, the one with your messages, your photos, your contacts, your entire digital life, could be searched, scanned, or even accessed remotely without you ever knowing? This isn't science fiction. This isn't paranoia. This is the reality of travel and technology in the current immigration enforcement landscape.
And if you're an immigrant, whether you're undocumented, have a pending case, hold a green card, or are in the US on a visa, you need to understand exactly how much information is being collected about you, who has access to it, and what risks you're taking every single time you step into an airport. Because the rules have changed, the systems have evolved, and what might have seemed safe just a few years ago could now put you directly in the crosshairs of enforcement agencies that are more aggressive, more connected, and more technologically advanced than ever before. So today we're breaking down everything you need to know about travel risks, data sharing between agencies, phone security, and what actually happens when immigration enforcement decides you're a target. This is critical information, and if you or anyone you care about is navigating the immigration system right now, you need to pay close attention. Let's start with something millions of people do without thinking twice: going through airport security. Say and ICE. How data sharing works and why it matters. When you check in for a flight, you provide your name, date of birth, and often your passport or ID number. That information goes into the airline system, but it doesn't stay there. The Transportation Security Administration, TSA, the agency responsible for airport security, also gets that information. And here's what most people don't realize. TSA shares data with other federal agencies, including Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. That means when you book a flight, when you check in, when you pass through security, your information can be flagged and shared with immigration enforcement. Why does this matter? Because ICE uses that information to track people, to locate people, and in some cases, to arrest people. If you have an outstanding removal order, meaning a judge has ordered you deported but you're still in the country, that information is in the system. If you have a pending immigration case and there's a warrant or a notice for you to appear, that's in the system too. And the moment you interact with TSA, that information can be flagged. Now, does that mean ICE is waiting at every airport to arrest every undocumented person who tries to fly? No. ICE doesn't have the resources to be everywhere at once, but they do prioritize certain people. People with removal orders, people with criminal records, people who have ignored court dates or failed to check in with immigration authorities. And if you fall into one of those categories, traveling by air significantly increases your risk of being detained, because you're no longer invisible, you're in the system, your name is flagged, and ICE knows exactly where you are. Can ICE track you? Understanding surveillance and enforcement tactics. Let's talk about tracking. Can ICE actually track your movements? Can they monitor where you go, who you're with, what you're doing? The short answer, yes, to a degree. ICE doesn't have unlimited surveillance capabilities. They're not following every immigrant around with GPS, but they do have access to a wide range of data sources that can reveal a lot about your life. Flight records, as we just discussed, hotel bookings, if you use your real name and ID, car rentals, which require identification and are logged in databases, employment records, especially if you've ever worked legally or filed taxes, social media activity, which can reveal your location, your routines, and your associations, and in some cases, phone location data. Now let's be clear, ICE can't just randomly hack into your phone and track you in real time. That's not how it works, but they can obtain location data through legal processes. If they have a warrant or a subpoena, they can request information from your phone carrier, social media companies, or app providers, and that data can show where your phone has been over a period of time. That means if ICE is actively investigating you, they can piece together a pretty detailed picture of your movements and activities. They can see where you've traveled, where you live, where you work, who you communicate with, and they can use that information to decide when and where to approach you. Can ICE read your WhatsApp messages? Phone security, and privacy. This is one of the most common questions people ask. Can ICE read my WhatsApp messages? Can they access my texts, my photos, my call history? Here's the truth. WhatsApp uses end-to-end encryption. That means the messages you send are encrypted on your device and can only be decrypted on the recipient's device. In theory, even WhatsApp itself can't read your messages. And neither can law enforcement unless they have physical access to your phone. But here's where it gets complicated. If ICE detains you, they can ask to search your phone. And if you unlock it for them, they can see everything. Your messages, your photos, your emails, your contacts, your browsing history, everything. Now, you might be thinking, can't I just refuse? Legally, it's a gray area. At the border or at a port of entry, courts have generally ruled that customs and immigration officers have broad authority to search your belongings, including your phone. You can refuse, but that refusal can lead to delays, secondary inspections, or even denial of entry. Inside the U.S., away from the border, the rules are different. If ICE approaches you on the street or at your home, they generally need a warrant to search your phone. But if you're being detained or arrested, they can ask. And if you consent, even without a warrant, anything they find can be used against you. That's why the most important thing you can do is this: know your rights. You do not have to unlock your phone just because someone asks. You do not have to consent to a search without a warrant. You can politely but firmly say, I do not consent to a search. But you also need to be prepared for the consequences. Refusal can make the situation more tense. It can lead to longer detention. It can create suspicion. So it's a decision you have to make in the moment, based on your specific situation. But from a privacy and security standpoint, here's what you can do to protect yourself. Use strong passwords or biometric locks on your phone. Don't keep sensitive information saved in easily accessible places. Consider using encrypted messaging apps for important communications. And if you're traveling, especially through airports or near the border, be aware that your phone could be searched. Some people choose to travel with a secondary phone that doesn't contain sensitive information. Others delete certain apps or messages before flying. These are personal decisions, but they're worth thinking about if you're in a high-risk situation. Travel warnings. Who should avoid flying? Right now. Let's be very direct about this. If you fall into any of the following categories, traveling by air right now carries serious risks. If you have an outstanding removal order, do not fly. Your name is in the system. You will likely be flagged, and you could be detained at the airport. If you have a pending immigration case and you've missed court dates or failed to comply with check-in requirements, do not fly. Again, you're at high risk of being flagged and detained. If you're undocumented and have had any contact with law enforcement, arrests, charges, even just being stopped, do not fly. Even if those charges were dropped or dismissed, the record still exists, and it increases your risk. If you're undocumented and have no criminal record but you're trying to fly domestically, understand that while it's technically possible, it's not without risk. TSA's primary job is security, not immigration enforcement. But as we've discussed, they share information. And if something flags your ID or raises questions, you could be referred to secondary screening, where immigration status can come into play. For green card holders, the risks are different but still real. If you've been outside the U.S. for an extended period, or if there's any question about whether you've abandoned your residency, you could face additional scrutiny when you return. If you have any criminal history, even minor offenses, those can be re-examined at the border. And if immigration officials believe you're inadmissible for any reason, your green card status can be challenged. That's why it's critical to understand your specific situation before you travel. Don't assume that because you have a green card, you're completely safe. Your status can still be questioned, especially if there are red flags in your record. What happens if you're detained at the airport? Let's walk through what actually happens if ICE or customs officers decide to detain you. First, you'll be pulled aside, usually during or after the security screening process. You'll be taken to a secondary inspection area. You'll be asked questions about your identity, your immigration status, your travel plans. This is where things can go in different directions. If you have valid status and your documents are in order, the questioning may be brief and you'll be released. But if there's an issue, an outstanding order, a visa violation, a criminal record, the situation becomes more serious. You may be formally detained. That means you're not free to leave. You may be transferred to an ICE detention facility, and deportation proceedings may be initiated or resumed. This is why it's so important to know your rights. You have the right to remain silent. You do not have to answer questions beyond confirming your identity. You have the right to speak to a lawyer. If you're detained, you should ask to contact legal representation immediately. You do not have to sign anything without understanding what it is. Some people are pressured to sign voluntary departure forms, which waive their right to a hearing. Do not sign anything unless you've spoken to a lawyer and you understand the consequences. But here's the harsh reality. Once you're detained, your options become limited. You may not be released quickly. You may not get a bond hearing right away. You may be transferred to a facility far from where you were arrested. And if you have a removal order, you could be deported within days. That's why prevention is so important. If you're at high risk, don't put yourself in that situation in the first place. Is it safe to travel? Assessing your personal risk. So how do you actually assess whether it's safe for you to travel? Start by asking yourself these questions. Do I have legal status in the U.S.? If yes, is that status current and valid? If no, do I have any pending applications or cases? Have I ever had contact with immigration enforcement? Have I ever been ordered to leave the country? Have I missed any immigration court dates or check-in appointments? Do I have any criminal history, even minor offenses? Am I traveling to or from a border region or international destination? Each of these factors increases your level of risk. If you answered yes to multiple questions, flying is risky. If you have an active removal order or you've been avoiding immigration authorities, flying is extremely risky. If you're undocumented but have never had any enforcement contact and you're flying domestically with a valid ID from a state that issues licenses regardless of immigration status, your risk is lower, but not zero. And if you're a green card holder or visa holder in good standing with no criminal history and no immigration violations, your risk is much lower. But even then, you should be prepared. Carry your documents, know your rights, have contact information for legal help readily available, and be aware that immigration policies and enforcement priorities can change quickly. The bigger picture, enforcement in 2026 and beyond. Let's zoom out and talk about where things are headed. Immigration enforcement in 2026 is more coordinated, more data-driven, and more aggressive than it's been in years. Agencies like ICE, TSA, Customs and Border Protection, and even local law enforcement in some areas are sharing information more freely than ever before. Technology is making it easier to track people, cross-reference databases, and identify targets. And political pressure is pushing enforcement agencies to prioritize arrests and removals. That means if you're in the system, if you've had any contact with immigration authorities, if there's any record of you anywhere, you're more visible than you've ever been. And that visibility creates risk. So what can you do? First, stay informed. Understand what's happening in immigration enforcement. Know what rights you have. Know what risks you're facing. Second, avoid unnecessary exposure. If you don't need to fly, don't. If you don't need to travel near the border, don't. If you don't need to interact with law enforcement or government agencies, don't. Third, get legal help. If you have a pending case, if you have a removal order, if you're trying to fix your status, work with someone who knows immigration law. Don't try to navigate this alone. Fourth, prepare for the worst. Have a plan in place for what happens if you're detained. Know who to call. Have important documents stored securely with someone you trust. Make sure your family knows what to do. And finally, protect your information. Be careful what you share online. Be careful what you post on social media. Be mindful of how much digital information you're creating that could be used against you. Because in the current environment, everything leaves a trail, and those trails can lead enforcement directly to your door. Final thoughts. Knowledge is protection. Here's the bottom line. Immigration enforcement is real. Data sharing between agencies is real. The risks of traveling, especially by air, are real. But knowledge is protection. If you understand how the system works, if you know what information is being collected and shared, if you assess your own risk level honestly, you can make smarter, safer decisions. You can avoid putting yourself in situations where you're vulnerable. You can take steps to protect your privacy, your rights, and your family. And you can navigate this landscape with your eyes open instead of being caught off guard. So stay informed, stay cautious, and stay prepared. Because the system isn't going to get easier, but you can get smarter, and that might make all the difference.